and a tweed cap pulled down over his forehead. It was his eyes that I spotted. It was always the eyes. But his was not the face I was really looking for. Neilson was a small-time crook of limited intelligence who hadn't been able to resist taking a handful of readies to try to fix a race, and he had paid a heavy price for his folly. He was hopeful of getting his riding licence back early, but he'd hardly endear himself to the stewards by sneaking into Cheltenham while he was still banned. I let him go by. I could always find him later, and went back to scanning other faces. I thought about gallbladders. What did they do if you could live without one? "Jeff, are you there?" said a voice in my earpiece. "Here, Nigel," I replied via the microphone I wore on my left wrist. "Any sign?" "No," I said. "Neilson's here. I saw him. I'll deal with him later." "Bloody fool. How about you?" "Nothing yet." Nigel Green was a colleague of mine in the BHA Integrity Service. He was watching the south entrance. 2 other BHA staff were covering the remaining ways in, but Nigel and I reckoned that our target would most likely use either the north or south entrance where the crowds were bigger. That is, if he came at all. I continued to study faces and tried to keep my mind off gallbladders and chemotherapy. How could she have cancer? My task would have been easier if I'd known none of the people funneling through the turnstiles. Then I would just have had to look for someone familiar. As it was, I knew about a quarter of those passing in front of me, owners, trainers, jockeys, as well as other regular racegoers that I had seen many times before. One of the reasons I had a job with the Integrity Service was because I had an uncanny knack of remembering faces and of putting names to them. I watched as Duncan Johnson, a top steeplechase trainer, made his way into the racetrack, followed closely and rather indiscreetly by a young woman 20 years his junior with whom he was currently having an affair. Mrs. Johnson, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. She would probably be at home in Lambourne waiting expectantly for James Sutton, a young groom from the village, who would come and spend the afternoon in bed with her, enjoying the racing on Channel 4 and other things, just as they did on most Saturdays. It was amazing what one could discover simply by frequenting the Lambourne pubs and keeping one's eyes and ears open. Snooping was a major part of my job, but I'd learned to be discreet and inconspicuous, asking very few questions myself, whilst encouraging others to ask for me. Duncan Johnson drifted away out of my sight, with his high-heeled concubine clicking away on the tarmac 5 paces behind him, fooling nobody. What sort of gall did a gallbladder store? I hadn't had time to search on the internet as Faye had called me just as I was leaving my hotel for the racetrack. I'd look it up later. The human swarm was beginning to thin out as the first race approached, most people having arrived early to grab a bite and a beer before the start of proceedings, with time to make their selections and place their bets. Those held up in the race day traffic now hurried through the turnstiles, making a beeline for the betting ring and the grandstand. "They're off!" The public address announced the start of the first race of the festival, greeted as always with a huge roar from the excited crowd. Perhaps the cancer has been caught early. I knew Faye had been for tests after having pains in her abdomen over Christmas, but she'd assumed it was kidney stones, something she'd had once before. What had she said that morning? I may have only a few months left. But Faye always tended to look on the darker side of life. As she had also said, time would tell. My mind was drifting again, and I almost missed him. Just as the race was coming towards an exhilarating finale, with the crowd cheering, the target came through the end turnstile in a rush, hurrying on as if he wanted to catch the finish. A red scarf wound around his neck and mouth, and with a battered and damp trilby pulled down hard over his ears. Again it was the eyes that gave him away. "Bingo!" I said into my microphone. "He's here. Following now." I slipped out of the